the government plans to scrap surcharges on debit card purchases from January 2026. The Prime Minister today said it was a cost of living measure. Well, the opposition have dismissed this as being simply a thought bubble pushed well out until after the next election. But surcharges on debit cards have crept up to pretty much the same level as those on credit cards. And that's because credit card usage has plunged at the same time that debit card usage is way up. The so-called least cost routing, which is where retailers could choose the lowest form of payment, clearly is not working. The question is whether business or banks and credit card companies or consumers are going to pick up the multi-billion-dollar bill once these surcharges go. Well, the Chief Executive of the Australian Association of Convenience Stores is Theo Foukkare, who joins me now. Theo, thank you so much for your time. I just want to go to the point about you represent the small convenience retailers who often impose the highest surcharges. So if the surcharges go, what are your members going to do?
Yeah, look, I think if the surcharges do go, which we support, by the way, but only when there is reform to the payment system. So what's underlying in this space is ultimately all the fees that get associated with transacting. And currently that falls onto the retailer and ultimately it falls onto the consumer. And so some retailers may choose to surcharge and other retailers may choose to incorporate it into their price.
Well, OK, I was going to ask you about that, because if a retailer in the future simply says, well, OK, we can't surcharge, we'll just add another 5 cents or 10 cents to the product, who knows? Who cares?
Well, Ross, it's a good point. If it was only 5 or 10 cents, it wouldn't be a problem. And it probably wouldn't even get added in. But what we're talking about is today up to 3 times more for small businesses in terms of a per transaction cost versus a large business.
OK, so I'm thinking now, if I go and buy a new phone for a couple of $1,000s, my transaction cost on that is going to be pretty significant, isn't it?
Absolutely. Probably up to about $20 for that transaction
Which then
alone.
starts to become a real thing, right?
Absolutely. And look, I think what we're faced with here is, you know, surcharging isn't a new thing. It was there initially as a price signal around credit card fees. More than 70% of transactions now are done with debit. Debit ultimately today is the new cash. And it's crazy that we are faced with a situation where consumers are getting slugged every single time they actually pay at the till for anything across any retail outlet.
Because I think there's a chart somewhere which we can show, which actually shows that credit card usage is going to the floor, as is the use of cash, and debit card usage is taking off. But the problem is that behind the scenes, the price of doing a debit card transaction is now very close to the same as that for doing a credit card transaction. That was never supposed to happen.
Absolutely. And the other complication is what you have is when you tap your physical card, least cost routing that you mentioned, if you are enabled for it, actually works. It'll go.
So why doesn't it work then?
Well, so it doesn't work because it's actually quite a complicated tool that when a retailer tries to set themselves up with least cost routing through their provider, often they're hit with a new set of fees that weren't there previously. So the net effect is you're not actually moving forward.
So hang on, who's making the money out of this then? Because if the retailers, you say, are trying to recover and not price gouge, which is kind of the implication that's coming out now, that the retailers are trying to price gouge, then behind the scenes, is it the banks that are actually making the dough? Because we're hearing here $6.4 billion in transaction fees per year.
Yeah, look, absolutely, it's the banks. And, you know, I think there is a cost to running the system for people to move their money around electronically. However, you know, our numbers put it at about $1.7 billion that currently businesses are collecting from consumers that's going straight to the bank's bottom line. And it does get a bit tricky because, you know, if you pay with your phone, and through COVID, everyone's moved to contactless and a lot of people don't carry their physical card with them anymore. So when you pay with your phone, least cost routing doesn't work. So it actually reverts back to a higher fee.
So seriously? So that's something, because I never use a card. I will only use my phone. So therefore, I'm constantly being charged, or somebody's paying the higher fee simply because I haven't got my physical card.
Absolutely. And this is a process that's been in place around the world in many markets where we're not living with this excuse anymore that it doesn't work because the technology doesn't allow it to.
So Theo, bottom line here, do you think the government will get away with this? Do you think they'll enact it or not?
So I think what the government need to do, in very simple terms, is firstly mandate least cost routing, and they need to legislate it. They shouldn't wait for the Reserve Bank. Secondly, they need to split credit card transaction fees from debit card transaction fees, because you can identify what's what. And then what they do need to do is actually have an even playing field. So there's one fee, it's as low as possible because, again, we're using our own money. And if they can get that right, then the surcharging ban makes sense. But if they don't get that right, then a surcharge is ultimately going to mean more cost for business and more cost for the Australian consumer.
I'll tell you what, Theo Foukkare, good to have you on the program. Many thanks for your time today.
Thanks so much, Ross.